Everyone has their own favorite puzzle game, whether it's a little bit of Sudoku for the old folks, or a crossword if you enjoy headaches and hate fun. And who could forget the yearly Portal 2 playthrough crew? Shout out to the starving Valve fans out there, I feel you buddy. But this video isn't about me wanting a new Portal game. That would be like 2 hours long. This is about one of my favorite puzzle games, Picross, also known as Nonograms, Pick-a-Picks, Paint by Numbers, and sadly some people decide to call them griddlers. For those who don't know anything about it, I don't know how you got here, but hi. Nonograms are puzzles that consist of a grid and a bunch of numbers, and these numbers correspond to rows and columns of the grid that need to be filled in. Once completed, the puzzle looks like a little pixel art picture in the end. This could be anything from a heart to a flower, or a tornado ripping a house out of the ground. With any logic puzzle, there's all sorts of strategies, and I could attempt to explain them, but it would be extremely boring and a complete train wreck. So just like go to WikiHow and look it up or something, I don't know. I have completed an unhealthy amount of these puzzles. They take up the perfect amount of time to make you just want to keep doing more of them. They're easy to pick up, satisfying, and just the right amount of challenge to get the little cogs in my gamer brain spinning. And let me tell you, they don't do much spinning. So one day I was sitting there perplexed by a 25 by 25 puzzle like a Picross peasant, and I wondered to myself, who the hell came up with this? I mean, these puzzles aren't that complex, but they are clever. So I go into internet gremlin mode as you do and search YouTube for an answer to this age-old question. And yeah, I didn't really find anything. Probably because no one looks at Nintendo and says, oh yeah, isn't that the company behind those multiple massive worldwide franchises like Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, and Picross? So hi there, I'm SNES. I spent roughly 2 weeks of my life digging around the internet and writing about the history of a puzzle game that like 3 people play. It probably could have taken less time in retrospect, but I have the attention span of a small rodent. The origin of Nonograms begins in 1987, the year where The Simpsons first aired. Average monthly rent in America was $395, and the first Final Fantasy game was released in Japan. In Tokyo, a graphic designer named Non Ishida won a competition by designing a picture that displayed on the side of a skyscraper. This was achieved by using the lights on the side of the skyscraper like a grid to create the image. The process of doing this inspired the designer to make puzzles that functioned similar to creating that image. She went on to create 3 examples of these, calling them window art puzzles, which isn't a very exciting name, but hey, that's fine. There's a story behind it, and it's not griddlers, so I'll take it. By coincidence, Tetsuya Nishio came up with this exact same puzzle in Japan around the same time. He named them Oekaki Logic, which translates to paint logic. This name is pretty commonly used in Japan as well. Moving back to Non Ishida, she was sharing her puzzles with James Dalgety, a man who has quite the past with puzzles. Presently, he manages the Puzzle Museum website, which is a bit dated, but it's very cool to explore. This video wouldn't exist without it, so check it out if you have some time. James thought the window art puzzles were really neat, and they began work together to distribute them. This collaboration is where the name Nonogram would come to be, combining the creator's name with the word diagram. The first publication to include nonograms was The Telegraph, and in 1993 they made some books that were available in many countries around the world. Things were beginning to pick up pace, and by 1995 puzzle magazines in Japan also featured these puzzles. After 4 books were published with Telegraph, Non Ishida decided to use the name Nonogram for her own work exclusively. This left Telegraph to come up with a new name for the puzzles, so they held a competition for readers to decide on the new one. This is where the dreaded griddlers came to be. I mean, what is wrong with British people? That name is awful. It sounds like the puzzles are like greasy. Like they're greasy and like oily. The first book of griddlers came out in 1999, and they continued making them until 2007. You can find these online, but they are ridiculously expensive. While I was looking for these, I found the 6th one here, and it's currently selling for $116 used. And look at the 6 on the cover. What the hell were they thinking when they made it? It looks soggy or something. It's not doing so well. As I mentioned earlier, nonograms had become relatively popular in Japanese magazines during the mid-90s. A small company named Nintendo you probably have heard of was getting ready to publish a video game adaptation of nonograms. They would use their own name for these puzzles, Picross, mixing the words picture and crossword. I like this name the most, and it's the one I'm most familiar with, so I'll be using it for the majority of the video. The first game was Mario's Picross for Game Boy, and it released worldwide in 1995. Developed by Jupiter and Ape, This had the puzzles you'd expect, but with a stylized look, and of course, Mario was in it. What's the easiest way to sell a game? I don't know, just put an Italian plumber in it. But he isn't wearing his usual plumber attire. He's seen wearing something more akin to an archaeology outfit to fit with the overall theme of the game. Placing tiles is visualized with a little hammer and chisel, making each puzzle kind of feel like digging up a little pixel fossil. Nintendo also brought back this outfit in Mario Odyssey as the Explorer outfit, which is a nice little throwback. So what did this video game adaptation bring to the table that was different from the puzzles you'd find in a magazine? Well, not much, to be honest. They did introduce a hint mechanic. When starting a puzzle, the player is asked if they want a hint. This will uncover one row and one column of the puzzle, making it significantly easier to solve. In total, Mario's Picross had 256 puzzles, and it's a pretty great game all around. But that didn't stop it from completely failing in North America and Europe. Again, I like this game, but I think it was just less popular in the West at the time, and that was its downfall. Moving forward, the rest of the Mario-themed Picross games would stay exclusive to Japan. But before they would make the sequel to Mario's Picross, the Super Famicom would get a weird one-off installment. Well, sort of. It was actually exclusive to the Satellaview peripheral. If you're like me, you probably have no idea what the Satellaview is. It was basically a satellite modem that attached to the Super Famicom. Once connected, users could download games and other media through satellite broadcasts. So it's basically just a caveman version of digital distribution. The broadcasted game was called Tamori's Picross, being named after a Japanese comedian. I have absolutely no clue why it was named after him. He doesn't appear in the game at all. That would be like me saying this video is J.J. Abrams' History of Picross. This game was broadcasted in multiple episodes, 4 of which are currently known of, but only 3 of them have been preserved online. The appearance of these games is very similar to Mario's Super Picross, which would arrive later in 1995. Developed by Jupiter and Creatures Inc., Mario's Super Picross was released for the Super Famicom instead of the Game Boy. This game would put Wario in the series as a different game mode with a new rule set. During Mario puzzles, the player is given a 30-minute time limit, and when mistakes are made, they're fixed automatically, but each mistake costs the player some of their time. Wario puzzles are pretty different. There is no time limit, but the player is not notified when making mistakes. There are also no hints available. So this is just the Dark Souls of Picross. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. The game also allows players to mark numbers when they're completed, which is really useful for larger 20x20 puzzles later in the game. If those are too difficult alone, there's a 2-player mode, allowing players to work together to solve one puzzle. And if a controller isn't preferred, the SNES mouse is compatible with this game. I had no idea the SNES mouse was a thing until making this video. While it was only released in Japan originally, Mario's Super Picross is now on the Nintendo Switch Online app, making it available in the West for the first time since 1995. Alright, so there's Mario's Picross, then Mario's Super Picross. So what would the next title in the series be? Mario's Picross World? Mario's Super Picross 2? I mean, maybe Mario's Picross 3? No, it's literally just called Picross 2. Released in October 1996 and developed by Jupiter, Picross 2 is one of the few games compatible with the Super Game Boy adapter cartridge for the Super Famicom. This made Game Boy games full color on a home console, and it was actually a really cool little accessory that had extensive customization. Even though the name doesn't include Mario this time around, both him and Wario return in the game regardless. They have the same rule set as last time, but they did change up a few things. In Picross 2, the puzzles are 30x30, but they're split into 4 sections of 15x15, meaning each board is 4 puzzles that need to be solved separately. This was a really good idea because it allowed puzzles to be more detailed. This is basically the first implementation of Clip Picross, or Mosaic Mode, whatever you want to call it. In total, there are 248 puzzles in this one, but since each of them have 4 puzzles inside of them, there's quite a bit of Picross to dig into here. One of my favorite parts is this Pokemon-style world map. You get to physically walk up to each puzzle and start it. It's like the Game Boy version of The Witness. But more importantly, there is a puzzle titled Help Me, which I can relate to, so thanks Picross 2. So the name is pretty terrible. It's the 3rd game in the series, doesn't have Mario in the title like the rest of the series, so it just confuses everyone involved. But I would say that this is the best Mario Picross game. It tried some new things, and I think it has a lot of charm. At least it ended on a good note, because this is the last Mario's Picross game for now. After the 3rd game, Picross development began to slow down, with nothing but another Satellaview release in 1997. I'd love to show this one, but there is no gameplay or screenshots of it anywhere. 2 years after that game barely existed, Jupiter was ready to release a big new title, and this time it was themed around Pokemon. Pokemon Picross was slotted to release for the Game Boy Color in 1999, and there were all sorts of magazines advertising the game leading up to launch. But for some reason, out of nowhere, the game was canned, which is confusing because the game was basically finished. A leak of the game spread online in 2020, and it's mostly functional with only a few bugs. It's similar to Picross 2, with visual changes to be more like a Pokemon game, like having Pokemon above the timer instead of Mario and moving away from the archaeology theme of the original series. Pokemon Picross had 11 levels, each one housing 15 puzzles. All 151 Gen 1 Pokemon sprites were in the game, and it was going to be compatible with the Game Boy printer, allowing players to print out their favorite Pokemon. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think canceling this game was one of the worst decisions for the entire Picross series. In 1999, you could put Pokemon on any game imaginable and it would sell decent worldwide. Regardless, it was scrapped and Jupiter moved on to the next project. Picross NP was a series of 8 games released in Japan on the Super Famicom exclusive to the Nintendo Power Service. A new game would be released bi-monthly, starting in April 1999 and ending in June 2000. Visually, these are just a little bit different from the previous Super Famicom titles. The puzzles are in a little book, and the cursor is a red marker instead of the hammer and chisel. Game modes are no longer split up by Italian men, they're split up by difficulty, which makes a lot more sense. Outside of the difficulty-based modes, there was also a character mode. The puzzles in this were themed around a Nintendo game or series from around that time. In order from Volume 1 to 8, the themes were Pokemon, Yoshi's Story, Kirby, Star Fox 64, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Super Mario 64, Wario Land 2, and Donkey Kong Country. After releasing all 8 of the Nintendo Power games, there was silence. No new games to be found. Not even one. Year after year, the chances of Picross making a return became more slim. I've coined this the Great Picross Depression. But after a total of 7 years, Jupiter would return with a bang. A Picross game to stand above all, the cream of the Picross crop. Picross DS for the Nintendo DS released in early 2007, and this time, it was worldwide. For the second time in the entire Picross series history, a game had finally returned to the West. It had been 12 years since Mario's Picross, and it couldn't have been a better way to come back. This wasn't just any Picross game. Well, actually, yeah, it really was just a normal Picross game. It had modes that you'd expect, but also so much more. In normal mode, it functions similar to Picross NP. There is no time limit, it just tracks how long the puzzle takes to solve. If mistakes are made though, it will give you a time penalty. Free mode is basically Wario mode from the previous entries. The player isn't told when mistakes are made and there's no time limit. Each level of normal and free mode contains 15 puzzles. Every time the player finishes 5 puzzles in a level, they unlock one of 3 mini-games. When I found out there were mini-games in this, I instantly bought a copy of the game on eBay because I'm just like messed up. No clue what the hell's wrong with me, but I just really wanted to try these mini-games. I thought they'd like take the gameplay of Picross in a new direction and it'd be really interesting to try them. I just like having something to break away from the main experience and take a little detour sometimes, and Nintendo usually has fantastic mini-games. Yeah, these suck. They're really bad. I tried all of them out and they're just so underwhelming. I would have called them like mini gimmicks instead. They just feel underdeveloped and like weird prototypes with the DS stylus. And worst of all, they really don't have anything to do with Picross, other than the fact that there are like squares on my screen. I feel like I could just play these games on a Texas Instrument calculator. Anyway, moving back to the real game. One thing I love about Picross DS is the level themes. Each level of normal and free mode has its own little theme. This is so cool, and it's a great way to spice up each level, and it has so much character. Like this one is stylized like little apples, and all the puzzles are fruit. And another one is like a lawn that you mow to like solve the puzzle, and it's just so fun and clever. I wish more of the games did this. In total, Picross DS has 135 puzzles and 24 minigames. That isn't as many puzzles as the previous game, which is kind of a shame, but there were daily puzzles to do while connected to the internet. Speaking of which, the biggest change this game would bring to the table was the addition of My Picross. This was made up of 2 different sections, Classic and Original. Classic had a bunch of puzzle packs from Mario's Picross and Picross NP that could be downloaded. bringing Japan-exclusive puzzles to a Western audience for the first time. Pretty cool stuff. There were a total of 12 packs released in the US, but sadly only 2 were available in Europe. I guess that's what you get when you come up with the name griddlers. The other section, Original Puzzles, allowed players to create their own Picross puzzles and share them with friends locally or online. This really opened the floodgates, allowing for seemingly infinite puzzles to be created and played. Picross functions so well as an intersection of a creative tool and a game. Anyone can create their own pixel art and make it a puzzle at the same time. I don't know why, but this is the only 2D Picross game by Nintendo that has player-made puzzles. But the fact that it even had this feature is something to look back on fondly. Picross DS is one of the best games in the series. Tons of different themes, a good amount of puzzles, and the ability to create your own. While it may be a fantastic entry in the series, why did they choose to make this game when they did? It had been 7 years in Japan and over a decade everywhere else. Well, I think there's a few reasons. The DS was extremely successful and popular at the time, and also Picross is a game that works really well with a stylus. It helps that the series had a reputation of being on handhelds in the past too. Personally, I find a lot of value in being able to bring these kinds of games with me anywhere. So, the moment we've all been waiting for. How did Picross DS sell in other countries? Did it hit the mark? Or was it going to have the same fate as Mario's Picross? Good news, it sold well. This is the game that made Picross a worldwide series. But what comes next would change things drastically, taking it to a whole new dimension, the third dimension. In 2009, HAL Laboratory released Picross 3D. As the name obviously says, the puzzles were 3D this time. Each one started with a rectangular prism made up of little cubes, some of which were marked with numbers. Just like normal Picross, this game allowed players to mark tiles until eventually solving the puzzle, but it feels more akin to creating a sculpture than painting. To get full marks, you have to solve within a time limit, but there's also special challenges like no mistake or strict time challenges. In general, the logic behind solving puzzles is very different from 2D Picross, and it's really engaging to play. From a distance, it looks dog shit burrito bad to control, but I honestly love how this game feels to play. It's really intuitive with the stylus. It makes me sad that no consoles have a stylus now so I could play more games like this. Surprisingly, this game also allowed players to create and download puzzles. Picross 3D is weird and it came out at an odd time. The series was finally worldwide for the first time in over a decade, and they decided to release something risky and different. The game sold relatively well, with a total of about 500,000 copies. Half of those sales came from North America as well. After 2 successful games in a row, things were finally looking up for Picross. But another big change was on the horizon. With the release of the 3DS, Nintendo was finally catching up on digital distribution. The eShop offered a platform for digital games, allowing developers to avoid the extra cost of making and distributing physical copies. For a series like Picross, digital makes a lot of sense, and Jupiter knew that. The first game to release on the eShop would be Picross E in 2011. This one is similar to Picross DS, but with a new mode called Extra, which is basically just free mode. In total, there was 150 puzzles. It also had this minimal look that's really not my thing, but it's okay. From there, Jupiter decided to go a little crazy with Picross games. From 2011 to 2018, 9 Picross E games were released on the 3DS eShop, 8 of which were released worldwide. These all had similar modes, total numbers of puzzles, and styles. This is a lot of games, so I'm just going to rapid fire these ones and go over the new additions. E2 had 155 puzzles and added a new mode called Micross. These puzzles were 80 by 80 and split up into multiple 10 by 10 puzzles, creating one large picture. This is similar to the puzzles in Picross 2 for Game Boy, as well as Clip Picross in future entries. E3 had 150 puzzles and adds Mega Picross. This mode has mega numbers that span across multiple rows and columns. I'm not a huge fan of Mega Picross. A lot of the time the games just reuse the same pictures from the normal mode, which kinda sucks. I guess it changes up the strategy for solving, so at least it has that going for it. E4 had 167 puzzles and introduced special puzzles that can only be accessed if your 3DS has the save data of the previous 3 games. Each game unlocks 5 puzzles, adding up to a total of 15. E5 had 153 puzzles, and it's basically the same as E4. E6 had double the amount of puzzles, sitting at a total of 303, but a lot of these might be repeats for Mega Picross. E7 had 318 puzzles and was basically the same as E6, other than the fact that it looks like an ugly Samsung phone background. Luckily, E8 is making up for E7 looking pretty damn slick, probably the nicest looking in the series. Too bad it was basically same as the past 2, with a total of 318 puzzles. The final game in the series was only released in Japan in August of 2018. E9 had 318 puzzles like E8 and is basically the same as the previous game. Alright, like anything, there's ups and downs. They started pumping these things out faster than Call of Duty, and you can tell by looking at the Picross E series. While that isn't entirely a bad thing, and the games aren't bad, it would have been cool to see a little more effort put into making these diverse. Adding new modes, unique visuals, more music, anything to make them look remotely different. Each of these games honestly blend together into a homogeneous blob of minimal design. But hey, this had a total of 2,032 puzzles to offer, and they were really cheap, being under $10. The entire series is sitting at an average rating of 66 out of 100. I think it's mainly due to the complaints I just brought up. There were too many games in such a short amount of time, oversaturating the eShop with samey sequel after sequel, and I guess people got kinda tired of it. And if you thought that wasn't enough games, there were also 6 spin-offs within the same time span. They released 15 Picross games in 7 years. 3 spin-offs were exclusive to Japan, but still, that's just way too many video games in 7 years. The games exclusive to Japan were Club Nintendo themed titles that were basically just what you'd expect, but they're red because Nintendo. Jupiter also released a Final Fantasy Picross spin-off for Square Enix during this time. Not technically a Nintendo game, but you know, it's close enough at this point. Now in the 3 worldwide spin-offs, things start to get interesting. We'll start things off with Pokemon Picross. You'd think it's just reusing the puzzles left over from the cancelled Game Boy Color game, but you'd be wrong. This is a freemium Pokemon-themed Picross game with microtransactions and an energy meter. Yikes. While it may be an extremely disliked model, the game was free and it had Pokemon in the name. You see this massive spike right here? That's the searches for Picross when this game released. So I'm kinda torn on this one. While I would never play it because, dear God, there's an energy meter in a Picross game, it did introduce a ton of people to the series, which is pretty cool regardless of the microtransactions in a single-player puzzle game. The next spin-off was nowhere near as eventful as that, and it was themed around Twilight Princess. It had a very quick and easy name to remember. My Nintendo Picross, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. You couldn't have just called it like Zelda Picross or something? They really sat down to name this game and said, okay, the title needs to have at least 15 syllables. It was available as a My Nintendo reward for 1,000 platinum points. It's basically just a Picross E game, but it looks like Zelda. Never played it, but it's cool for the fans of the series, I guess. Last but not least is Sanrio Characters Picross. This is the best of the Picross E series in my opinion. It's unbelievably cute, and you unlock little stickers when you complete puzzles, and you can decorate the cards of the characters with them. I also got to learn all the different characters that I didn't really know anything about, which was really fun. It has so much personality compared to the rest of the 3DS games, so if you're gonna get any of them, grab this one. With the endless onslaught of Picross games, it's easy to forget that the sequel to Picross 3D released in 2015. Hell, I almost forgot it while writing this video. I'm glad I didn't though, because HAL Laboratory really made something great here. The biggest change from the original is the 2-color painting system, and I think it improves the puzzles quite a bit. The logic behind solving these is very, very different from the first game, and I find it way more fun to play. They also nailed the style in this sequel, taking place in a cozy cafe with really comfy menus and a great soundtrack. There's amiibo support, which will unlock extra puzzles, so that's pretty neat. This is the most recent of the 3D Picross games, and I hope there's a future for this series because I really think these are great. With the 3DS declining in popularity and the release of the Switch in 2017, Jupiter was ready to hop onto the new console with the same plan as the previous. Only a few months after the release of the Switch, Picross S was available in September 2017. It's pretty underwhelming. 150 puzzles and a minimal look, they stuck with the same thing from the 3DS. It wouldn't just look minimal either, it also only included 2 modes, Normal and Mega Picross. To continue the minimal theme, there's also only a total of 4 songs. One of them only plays on the title screen too. For some reason, the tracks in these games in particular just irritate me beyond belief. They're really short, so they repeat quickly, and it just drives me nuts to listen to them over and over. The Picross S games released at about the same pace as Picross E. S2 came out in 2018 and added Clip Picross, which is basically just mosaic mode, but the puzzles are all different shapes for some reason. The biggest addition arrived in the next game, Picross S3, and that's Color Picross. I love this mode, it functions very different from the normal game, and it's nice to have that available. I'm surprised this didn't make it in earlier because Color Picross has been around for a while. From there, the series has pretty much been stagnant, with S4, 5, and 6 being more of the same from the third game. There's also a few spin-offs, but they're pretty much the same too, with a slight alteration to fit whatever franchise it's based on. Overall, I feel the same about the Switch games as the 3DS ones. They're even more samey visually, and besides color Picross, they didn't really add anything new. I think it'd be really cool to bring back the style of Mario's Picross and remake it in some way, have that archaeology theme come back with the modern Switch hardware. And with that, we are now caught up. That's the entire Nintendo Picross series, still being developed by Jupiter, the same company from 1995 to 2021. Although it had a rough start, in the end, Picross is still being made and released worldwide. Not only that, but Picross has become the most commonly used name for these puzzles, with Nonograms in second. Griddlers is basically only used in the UK. Thank God. You might think this is where the video ends, but you'd be wrong. Outside of Nintendo, there were quite a few companies trying their hand at adapting Nonograms to video games. Some of them worked well, some of them didn't, and others are just really weird. I'll mostly be covering the weird ones, but also some notable third-party games that are just really good. One of the earliest in the scene was Logic Pro in Japan. This series had 3 games and they all have a similar bright and cartoony style, which I think is pretty cool. I like the look of them a lot. The weird part is the first 2 games were arcade cabinets. I feel like these would have been the least played in the entire arcade. It would have been the one in the corner just covered in dust. Who goes to an arcade to play Picross? That just feels wrong. The final installment of Logic Pro made its way to PlayStation though, so it got to consoles eventually. Speaking of PlayStation, there were a metric ton of options available for Picross fans on Sony's first 2 consoles. From what I can tell, the best series seemed to be Colorful Logic. It had some extremely aesthetically pleasing box art. Like, damn, look at these boxes, they look so neat. But the puzzle art leaves a little more to be desired. Like, what is this? I have no idea what I'm looking at. And this next one is even more confusing. It's just like 2 sticks that are green. And then there's the Loch Ness Monster, I guess. I don't even know. My favorite part is this clown-like music the game has. As a big fan of music that has clown energy, this is a fantastic soundtrack. Some third-party releases came out on Nintendo consoles, like this one for Nintendo DS called Iraroji Vow, and it was developed by From Software. This game was made by From Software. I guess this one is actually just the Dark Souls of Picross. There's something truly special about seeing that logo on the box for a DS puzzle game. I don't think I'll ever get over it, honestly. It really just drops the player right in, too. The first puzzle's 15 by 15, which is pretty large for a first. Also, the puzzle music is like unreasonably groovy. Like, this slap bass is going way too hard. Digging through the later puzzles, this gets really hard. Like, look at how big this is for a puzzle on a DS game. I meant it as a joke originally, but like, this is actually a really difficult game. I guess From Software doesn't hold your hand when it comes to Picross either. This is a 25 by 25 color Picross puzzle. I can't even comprehend what I'm looking at right now. Somehow that isn't even the most perplexing Picross game. The peak of confusion has to be Rockman's pixel art logic. For those who don't know, Rockman is the Japanese name for Mega Man. And listen, there's an absurd amount of Mega Man games. Capcom would make any game possible and throw him in it, but I don't think anything proves that better than this game. This was released for cell phones in Japan, and I don't mean like an iPhone app. I'm talking like flip phones. Like, isn't it crazy that this was developed? A team of people were like paid money to create this. Why did this happen? What were they doing in 2011? Not all third-party options are confusing and bad though, and I'd like to highlight some modern options I think are pretty great. My favorite option on Steam has to be PictoPix. It controls well, looks nice, has a lot of visual customization, and the music is super chill. Not only that, but there's so many puzzles. Along with that, there's also Steam Workshop support. Players can create, share, and play anything with a nice in-game search browser. While I was making this video, I found another game on Steam called Murder by Numbers, which is apparently made by the developers of Fall Guys. It mixes the puzzle solving of Picross with visual novel elements, telling the story of a murder mystery. I haven't played many visual novels, but I enjoyed the first hour of this one. The last game on Steam happens to be a 3D Picross game called Voxelgram. With normal 2D Picross games, I'd say there's enough to go around, but 3D Picross is a pretty barren market right now. This is definitely the best option available that I know of, and it isn't on a Nintendo console if you don't have that. I'd say the only problem is the controls are nowhere near as intuitive as using a stylus with the 3DS. Finally, I'd like to mention a mobile Picross game called Picross. This takes what you'd expect but blends it with social media elements, letting players create puzzles and receive likes and comments. It's really well made and it's free. Well, I think that about sums up the history of Picross. For such a simple game, there was a lot more to cover than I thought. The origins, the terrible name Griddlers, Nintendo's troubles early on of bringing the series worldwide, 800 eShop releases, and a Mega Man flip phone game. If you're looking to try out some Picross, I recommend checking out these games on your preferred platform and giving it a shot. They're all relatively cheap compared to full price games, and if you can get it on a handheld, I'd definitely recommend that. Okay, that's all the time I've got. I gotta get back to playing Picross 3D Round 2 on my Nintendo 3DS. Thanks for watching. Rockin' Stone.